my first time even considering cinema was when I watched this Zimbabwean film called Yellow Card, which was quite a fascinating story, and I grew up with those characters and just the way that they used to tell stories in Zimbabwe, which was very different from the way Western films are told, because for us, it felt as if the character represented you, you could see yourself in the character and what they were doing, and they were not doing exaggerated stuff, like they were not action heroes or people like that, but they were like everyday people just going through life and going through circumstances that you can relate to or that you sometimes find yourself in. So that's where my love of cinema came from. And then when I moved here, I came with the thought that opportunities galore. All you need to do is have a dream and everything will be given unto you. Little did I know, it's you and everybody else. It's a massive competition. When I was in film school, we had to come up with our final school project. And for me, everything had to be rooted in where I'm from, who I am, the stories that I tell, the life that I live. I couldn't come up with anything else. Like, I had a buddy who came up with a story of a group of teenagers who had a party and they end up stabbing one of the kids, and that's not something that happened where I'm from. Like, the first thing in your mind was not to commit murder. When it came to women, you could fight for a girl, but like, it wasn't like, I'm trying to kill you, whilst it's a big possibility. What I mean? So I couldn't really fathom the type of storytelling that was required. So I ended up writing a story where I thought I was uniquely positioned to tell, which is the story of an immigrant, first generation and a second generation, because I have a lot of cousins who are second generation, and in our meetings, like when we meet, it's always tricky because I grew up in Zimbabwe, they grew up in America, and then there's the stereotypes that we feel towards each other that always come out in how we treat each other. But then it's like, as soon as you start having a conversation, you're put in a position where you're like, oh, we're not really that different. We just grew up in different places and we have different perspective on things. But essentially, we share the same blood, and also like there's a curiosity of, I want to get to know you and I want to be part of your life and stuff like that. So that then is what influenced a lot of the ideas that came up within the film. But when I was in school, one of my teachers told me that in order to have an impactful story, you want to make sure that there's a piece of you in that story. So one of the things that I was dealing with when I was now writing the script, it was this concept of a child's manifestation into the life. What happens when one person in the relationship wants the child and the other person does not? And what happens when the person that wants the child is the man and the person that doesn't is the woman? And how does that conversation go? How does that thought process go? First of all, you want to respect her body, her choice, but also you also have to deal with that. Because I feel like for a long time, as men, we are almost just sort of put in a position where when things don't go your way, you have to know how to deal with that. And I think a lot of times guys don't actually know how to deal with it. How do you deal with not getting what you wanted? Especially when it's something that is as life-changing as a baby, So I wanted to explore that and to showcase how that has an impact and an effect on a person, like how a character processes it. So that was the main driver of the film. And then just bringing in a lot of community within the film, because to make it truly African, there's always a sense of family. So the film is about family, it's about family dynamics, it's about that welcomingness that we have in our community, but also like how dangerous that can be, because you never know who's coming into the community and what their intentions are. And because we live in the Western world where there's Western influences, it's almost impossible for someone to predict what the next person is going to do. So those were some of the things that we were thinking of in terms of theme and in terms of tone and pacing and setting when I was coming up with the concept of the film. But then at the end of the day, it became a film of its own, because I believe that when you're writing, the characters tell you what they want. The characters tell you where they want to go, and that you make adjustments to it, and you're just there to guide the story and make sure we're hitting the points that we're supposed to hit. Part of the reason why I wanted to make the film was when I come from a place of doing, the way there is no such thing as tomorrow. Whereas I feel like the way the film process works is it takes time. I remember in a class they were like, it would take 4 years to raise money to make a film. I'm like, in 4 years, I don't want to tell that story. There's a lot that has happened in 4 years. I want to tell a different story. So for me, the idea was, well, if nobody is going to give us the money to do it properly, I mean, how hard can it be for us to do it by ourselves, to spend our own money and buy equipment and do what we need to do, and we ended up investing a lot of money into it. In my opinion, it's money well spent, because my thought process was, if we buy the gear once, to make one movie, you can use the same gear to make the next movie. It's simple thought, but like, that wasn't my thought process. So we ended up self-funding it the whole way through. The biggest challenge, to be honest with you, that we had with the film was transport and food. So when you're dealing with those two issues, it's like, it's a challenge, man. Like, if you can't feed people and you want them to work with you for 12 hours and they're essentially volunteering their time, it's difficult. But we made it work. We made it work for everybody, and I'm glad that my collaborators were with me through it all, and especially like a lot of my collaborators were Canadians, were people born here or people not even born in Canada, but they have different cultures, and they took on this film even if they didn't understand some of the themes or some of the dialogues of the things that we're trying to go for. What they invested in was just support, and supporting somebody with a dream, and for that I'm forever grateful. The title "What Happened to Maria" comes from, the first thing that I noticed when I came into Canada, especially at work, was you'd be working with someone, and then after 2-3 weeks that person disappears, and you think, oh, maybe they took a day off, but then it'll be 2 months later and that person is gone. And at some point you ask that question, hey, what happened to so and so? And in most cases, people don't know. People just disappear. Whereas coming from home where you almost knew everybody, and the moment you ask a question of like, yo, what happened to this person? Oh, they'll be able to explain to you like, oh yeah, this person did this, now they're over there or whatever. You can go find them over there. So that was the concept of the name, is where it came from, as What Happened to Maria. The original name of the film was called P.S. I Love You, which was a love letter from Maria to her mom. If you've watched the film, you'd probably understand where that came from. But that was the concept of it. And then we had to move on from there to What Happened to Maria. But that's the primary where it comes from, is just like having a conversation. Because I think with immigration, a lot of people's life is temporary. People nowadays, I know it's a big topic of immigration, but what people don't really talk about is how the immigrants themselves are impacted. Some people get 2-year visas to be in Canada to work. They come in, they do their 2 years, and at the end of that year, if you don't get an extension or if you don't move to the next stage that allows you to stay, you have to uproot your entire life. And in those 2 years, you've made friends. In those 2 years, you've created these communities, and all of a sudden you're missing, and people go through it. So that was the essence of what we were trying to build. And then also like having her journey in two places, because also I wanted her to have a life in South Africa and to have a life here in Canada, and then to showcase how the difference is, because now it's like how the world has become so global. And I know we're now anti-global, but like when the world was pro-global, just how the world works, and you have this person who's been fighting their whole life to come to Canada, be introduced, and then they see someone who's like, yeah, I'm getting out. And I think that one of the things is, when I was growing up, you dream of coming to places like Canada, you dream of going to the States. But a lot of times, everything is based off of what you see on the television. You're watching movies. I know I was watching the Kardashians, and I thought what the Kardashians had was everybody's life. When I watched T.I. and Tiny's Family Hustle, and you look at that family camaraderie, like how happy they were, how kids will be like, oh, I need a job, and they'll end up just working like at a Walmart, or, this thing where it felt like, oh, this is the life that they live. And then you fly over and you come in and it's like, oh my God, reality hits like, there's different economic levels, not everybody is a Kardashian, not everybody gets to live such a life. So it's also serving as a warning to people like, yeah, this country is like they have good branding, but it's not as what is kept up to be. Sometimes you be careful what you wish for, really. The film touches heavily on the subject of gender-based violence because this is something that I grew up witnessing, and not to say it happened in my household, but because it happened around me and in the atmospheres that I was in. And I think it's a reality a lot for a lot of immigrants as well, because a lot of people come and they carry bad behaviors or don't know how to process anger, and it's highlighted in the film how we get here, because I think that as a man, speaking for myself, like I don't know an abusive guy. I don't have a friend that I would say is abusive, but the weird part is women get abused almost every day. 1 in 3 women is abused. So it's like, oh, so that means I do know someone who's very abusive, but I just don't know that person. And I think what the film tries to do and what I was trying to go for was to say that, like, in most cases, when guys are like, yeah, I wouldn't do that, I'm a good guy. And women are like, yeah, we get that, but you don't get it. It's more of me just trying to say, this is why we don't get it. Because we just don't. And it's not like we speak about these things. It's not like I'm sitting down with my friend and he's like, yo, I was doing this to my girl. Like, we barely speak about people's girl. It might be, how's your girl? Oh, she's cool. That's cool. And that's it. Beyond that is none of my business. Unless he's going to be physically violent with you in my presence, then I have room to step in. But other than that, it's like, so the film touches on that, and that was a big theme that we were going for, and just trying to highlight, and also just to serve as a warning, like, yo, be careful, and these may be the signs of somebody being abusive. Don't ignore them, and yeah, we highlight on that. I think for me, the way I see African cinema or diasporan cinema is a lot of films that I watched growing up, and a lot of films that I've watched. They have this. It's either you have somebody who's trying to come into America and into the first world, and they make fun of these people, or there's this element of the accent. There's a lot of things that are accentuated. Whereas with my type of storytelling, it's more of I'm telling you a story from realness. These are real people. These are things that people deal with, and I think when you're watching the film, you'll see that, like, we try to stay away from a lot of stereotypes and centered on the story and focused on the story, because I do believe that African cinema a lot of times misses out on that. There's a lot of great South African films that have great characters and that just shine, but a lot of things that I see where it's like on the opposite spectrum is because when you move into Canada or when you move into the spaces, you almost have to let go of everything that you were to survive in the new realm that you are in. But I think that in the past 5 years, or in the past 10 years, really, the way immigration has worked is you haven't had to change who you are because the world celebrates that. And this is highlighted in the film because we showcase that. So it's not a typical African film to whereby it's trying to hit on every stereotype of our story. This is a story about a young woman who's having to navigate a very troublesome situation where she's coming from, she's having to live 2 lives in 2 different countries, and she has to deal with those consequences. And it's like, how does somebody do that? And then you have young men, you have all these different characters around her who are also trying to satisfy their goals and achieve what they're trying to achieve. So the film is quite different. Like, there will be many films like it, I'm assuming, but like, the film is mostly centered on the storytelling of the human condition. I wanted to avoid by any means necessary the concept of making fun. Somebody told me that the difference between like how the type of films I grew up watching and what's made here in the West is, in the West, movies are made to sell, whereas everywhere else movies are made to tell. And part of this is made to tell. I know making fun or us expressing much pain makes money, but whereas with this, it's about telling a story, the journey that a lot of African diasporans have to deal with, and what the second generation, third generation of those very same people, some of the issues and situations they have to deal with.